up to the woman to decide whether she wants to cover or not. Of course, in some countries, the social pressure to cover supersedes the woman's desire to maybe not cover. So if you don't want to be an outcast, you go along with your family or your friends or people around you and you cover your hair. Here in the United States, it's more or less understood that, and I have a lot of friends that don't cover. I don't cover all the time. But it's up to the woman to decide. Is this something I need to do? Is it something I want to do? But in Iran, it's the law. You must.
A law?
It's the law. Yep. And unless they change the law, they're going to have problems with these thugs that come around and beat you if you're, wearing something that's too tight and shows your body, the curves of your body, or if you don't have your hair covered. In other words, you can't be attracting the attention of the men around you. You're responsible for the response of men. Figure that one. Yeah. That's about the size of it. And I've always felt that was ridiculous. Men should be responsible for their own actions, but, don't tempt. That's the thing.
Well, I think it's...
Of course, there are rules for
their
the men,
hair
too.
is tempting. I can see,
not mine, but...
mine.
And I think don't you feel that same, as strange as we make that, we go, oh, that's really weird. But I think that's a battle that men and women, male and female relationships, are still struggling with even in this country. I mean,
absolutely,
it's not.
Rape victims go to court, and in the past, but still, even nowadays, people seem to feel, well, she was asking for it because she was dressed in a short skirt or she had too much makeup. We tend to blame the woman for, excitement in the male of the species, but
and there's
this is the same thing. It's the same idea.
A deeply held, I don't know how far back it goes, but there's a pretty deeply held belief that a male human being cannot control himself once he's excited. I mean,
that's right.
And you hear this in big and powerful ways, but you also hear it in very subtle ways. I mean, boys will say it to girls. If they're out on a date and and they're, I don't know, being physical somewhat, and then the girl decides, I've gone far enough. Boys have for generations said to girls, well, you can't say no now. Because I'm already excited. You can't do that. And yet we look at cultures like Iran and we see more extreme, I guess, head coverings or rules about showing your hair, and we think, oh, isn't that primitive? But we haven't really dealt with the problem of men being responsible for their own behavior, and women being responsible for their behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are rules for men too. Men are supposed to lower their gaze. You're not supposed to make eye-to-eye contact with women you don't know. So the men are responsible as well, and they are responsible for their actions. It's just it's easier to pick on women, and it's easier to pick on how women look and how they're dressed. This has always been a problem for women, so but in Islamic law, you're supposed to be modest. That's it. So it's up to you to interpret what modesty means. And a lot of women who cover because they're pious, like men in Judaism who wear yarmulkes. Out of piety. Women in Islam will choose to cover because they're pious and they feel that they've been called to do that, so they will. And I think that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I just don't choose to cover all the time. There was a time when I did, but I don't anymore. So, it's up to the woman, I think, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it's supposed to be, but whatever. Yeah.
No, I couldn't figure out why the hair was such a hot item.
Well, isn't it said the hair is the crowning glory of a woman? Isn't that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in Judaism, it's the same. The ultra-Orthodox wear wigs to cover their hair. When they get married, they no longer are allowed to go out with their hair uncovered. A lot of women
Really?
a lot of women wear kerchiefs, but then you see all these women with this lovely hair, and you think, wow, their hair always looks just so. Well, it's their wigs, because when they get married, they cover their hair. And I'm in a group called the Sisters of Salam Shalom, and this was a topic one time. We Muslim women wanted to know, isn't it kind of an oxymoronic thing to do to say you don't want your hair to be seen, so you buy a wig to cover your hair, but you still look like it's your hair. It's like it didn't make any sense to us. But it seems to be acceptable in the ultra-Orthodox community. So, it's what custom is and where you are, which country you're in, and which, a lot of that is tradition.
There's a lot of, I don't know, we bend our minds around these things sometimes, and we fail to see that they are institutions for whatever purpose and however they function. They're just rules that we invent. They're, for years, and also a couple of things come to my mind. The women in the Mennonite tradition always cover their hair. They have a head covering. And
Right.
in some orders, it's pretty extensive. But I never thought of the covering connecting the Mennonite and Amish women to Iranian women, because it's all the same thing. It's covering your hair. It's showing your modesty. Now the men in the Amish tradition, the men who are married have to grow a beard. They're not allowed to shave their beards. Their beard is a sign also of their belonging. It's like wearing a wedding ring. You can't shave, and you have to wear a hat, and they have all these restrictions. When I was a child, the issue in my parents' family during the 60s was men growing their hair long. I mean, long hair, the Beatles, that was long hair, if you can believe it. That is incredible that the Beatles' hair was considered long hair, because their hair was only just a little longer than mine. But my father was, he was adamant that we boys in his family were not going to have long hair. And then there are also traditions of women.
That's me.
I know. I'll just wait.
You're coming through twice.
I know. I'm trying to fix it. I was using my phone. Okay.
Oh,
That's better.
there you go.
Nope.
And now you're off.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's only when you talk.
Anyway, I have a message from Elaine.
Okay.
She got out a lot of Christmas decorations and was writing cards. And I think she got very melancholy, because Bill had just recently passed.
Oh.
So she said she was just going to go to bed.
Oh. Well, I can certainly understand that. This is the season for that, stirring up our happy feelings and also happy memories of the past, and then reminders that things have changed. It's big. So, Debbie, did you get it straightened out for yourself?
No, I'm trying to figure it out. I shouldn't have used the phone. So how do I get out of it?
Hang up and try a computer. Is your computer not working?
No, it's on. That's the problem. I've got both of them going.
Yeah, so if you can disconnect yourself on your phone, it'll go away. Or
That's what I'm trying to do.
disconnect your computer. Just sign off.
All right.
You can also take your phone and put it in the other room, just so it can't hear. The problem is it can hear.
Just say leave on the right-hand side.
Okay.
There you go.
Are you there now? We only have one of you now. But
Yeah, I'm not on video anymore, but I'm going to get off the phone somehow.
Can you hit leave?
Yeah, well, if I can get the screen back
Even
up.
if you have to come back on your computer. Here I am, the techie genius.
I know.
I left
Well,
I have to send the link.
the thing is, we've all been there. I remember one night I tried to open this study and I could not get it to stop feeding back, and for nothing, because I couldn't get the sound on the one unit. Anyway, it's boring to talk about, but it's just, we get into these cycles. It's just the way it is.
Very
Okay.
frustrating. Very frustrating.
All right, I don't know how to get out of this now that I don't have the screen up on the phone. So,
Are you still on your computer?
no, I signed it off the computer. That's why it's not reverberating anymore.
Right. So
But-
now you just have to figure out how to turn your picture back on your phone.
Zoom. There you go.
There we are.
So I
Now.
should just stick with the phone then.
Yeah.
I like the computer better, but I'll stick with the phone. I thought the phone would be better for this, but it's not. So, but it's all because of these glasses that don't work very well. All right. Get on my eyes. Okay. Let's stick this back up here. All right. How many of us are there then tonight?
It looks
Not
like just
many.
4. Yeah.
Okay.
Judy usually comes along a little bit later. And,
All right.
so maybe Judy will be here. Elaine's not coming. And Alice was here with us last week, but she didn't say whether she was coming back this week or not. So, all right. So why don't we pick up and head off into Nehemiah land? Did we read chapter 1 of Nehemiah last?
No.
Okay, so let's start with that before we get too far into other subjects, okay? I've been working today, I did a lot of reading today to try to sort this out in my head. These books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they're strange, because in some ways there's a sequence that picks up from when they've started to rebuild. Ezra, of course, is part of the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And then Nehemiah comes along, and he's sort of the political leader, which is what they say. But there's segments of this that jump forward and backward in time. And the scholars say that these writings were not all written at the same time, and they were not all circulated at the same time. So there's an editorial mess here, especially as we get somewhat into what they call the third stage of reconstruction, which Nehemiah supervises, and we're going to see a lot of that sort of taking shape. But we're just going to have to try to hear the bigger arching story rather than trying to pin down the details of what they're talking about. I think you'll see similar themes to Ezra as they try to identify. The priests seem to have their place in the temple, and the rituals of the temple seem to be in place. But now there is the formation of the city and of the community itself. How to structure this new community. And I see I have a microphone going dead, so I got to change that too. All right, so would somebody like to start by reading, just jump right in there.
We start. My notes say Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king.
Which king?
He's a cupbearer.
A cupbearer is a slave who's responsible for when the king needs a drink. The cup is. They have to be careful that the drink isn't poisoned. So the cupbearer is like a food taster. It's someone that is charged with making sure that the king can drink at a meal, and that drink isn't poisoned by somebody who wants to kill the king.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Shall I read?
Sure.
And you can read tomorrow, Barbara.
That's the deal.
Okay. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, one of my brothers, Hanani, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them about the Jews who escaped those who had survived the captivity, and about Jerusalem. They replied, the remnant there in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for your servants, the Israelites, confessing the sins of the Israelites, which we have sinned against you. Both I and my family have sinned. We have offended you deeply, failing to keep the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you commanded Moses your servant. Remember the word that you commanded Moses your servant. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are under the farthest skies, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I have chosen to establish my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great power and your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servants and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give success to your servant today and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. At the time, I was cupbearer to the king.
Okay. There. Hi, Alice. How are you?
Hello, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Oh,
All right. So you hear in the words of Nehemiah himself the recitation again of this. I don't know what we're supposed to do with this. Nehemiah is saying, okay, look, this is the way it works, right? I'll go back to Barbara's things about transactional relationship with God. Nehemiah's understanding was if the people were obedient and did what God wanted them to do, then they would prosper and be protected. And by what God wanted them to do, he puts the words out that it's in the law. It's in the law that was written. And now that they realize, I guess the only reason they realize they haven't been conforming to the law is because they've been wiped out. There's devastation, military oppression, and destruction of all their homelands and all who they were. And so he's praying a prayer of repentance on behalf of all the people. And, hear our prayer, O God. Now we're all ready to revere your name, and we pray that you give success and grant mercy in the sight of this man. So I don't know Well, I got my daughter calling me. I got to hang up on her. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it anymore. I feel like we kind of go back around and around. I mean, they've got this major disaster in front of them, and I don't think like this. I think we've agreed. None of us think like this. We don't look at the tragedy that happens in our lives or in our nation and assume that that means that, God is trying to punish us. I don't know how we can say both things at the same time, because on the other hand, I want to say, sometimes maybe we ought to look at some of our national tragedies and wonder if it didn't come about because we have been, violating what I would call a law of God, which is the love of our fellow human beings. That if we continue to violate that law, you can count on the fact that civilization is going to break apart. It's not sustainable.
But it's not God who's decided that. It's human beings who have made it that way. And that's why it is going that way. From my perspective.
No, and I share that perspective, so I keep trying to find the words, that get us away from this, this language. So in what you're saying, Barbara, when you say it isn't God that's doing it, do you think that Nehemiah's prayer is appropriate then?
No, because forgiveness certainly for what is not the proper way to do it, but I don't believe that God caused it in the first place, if that makes sense.
What about somebody else? Do you think, I've sort of asked this before, but I'm going to stand on it a little bit more. Do you think God relates to the world, the populations this way? If you do what I tell you to do, I'll be fine. I'll defend you and see to it that you endure and you survive and you prosper. But if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to see to it that you're destroyed.
I think it's all part of God giving us free will. In that, if you do what I say, I'll be there, I'll protect you and do whatever. But if you don't, you're kind of on your own. Whatever becomes of, what you've done, you have to pay the price. I think that sounds better to me and my feelings than a punishing God.
Yeah, instead of God getting angry and saying, I'm going to do this to you, but it was baked into the cake from the very beginning, and you knew it. You knew it was there, and then you went ahead and you did it anyway, and so now look, you're suffering the consequences. But then, what is this prayer that says, "Okay, God, forgive me"? Forgive me. Like, if you forgive me, God, then I'll be restored. That's the part where we get into this idea that God is somehow, destroying and punishing. And it's not like consequences of our behavior, but that God is actually punishing. God is seeing to it that the people are destroyed, that walls are torn down, and I don't know. There's something in between here. I was thinking today, this way of understanding God, bear with me while I experiment, just seems very primitive. It seems very, very primitive. This transactional idea that Jerusalem was destroyed. Why was Jerusalem destroyed? Why were the walls torn down? Well, for a cause. And even the free will argument, to me, doesn't get us out of it. It was like, well, because what? We lived recklessly and immorally, and because we lived recklessly and immorally, God empowered. This is what the theology says. God empowered the armies that were on our borders to become strong, and they came in And their destruction of Jerusalem was the discipline rod of God. There's a place where Nehemiah uses that phrase, the rod of God. And I'm assuming that was like a tradition in families, right, where the father would take the rod and beat the child for behavior that was really bad. Just seems awfully primitive to me. And
right, kind of crazy thinking, I think, because if you have this kind of relationship where if you don't toe the line on all these supposed rules of God, like don't marry other women, don't you do this, don't, then if you repent of that and things still go wrong, and they're going to, what does that do to your faith?
Yeah.
If you feel that you've fulfilled what God wants you to do and things still go wrong, as they will, then, what happens? Then you stop believing in God? I think the idea of the 10 Commandments is like basic rules for smart living around other people in the world. Don't cheat other people, don't kill other people, don't, all those basic things that make life livable around other people. I think that's kind of what you can say God probably wants us to do. But all this other jazz about, okay, don't marry foreign women, don't wear, clothes that are too revealing, don't do this, do that, all these, how many rules there are in the Torah?
Yes.
There's a huge amount of rules, some of which, like, don't combine two different kinds of materials in your clothing. What does that do? I mean, that, to me, it's like common sense. Common sense says, don't kill your neighbor, because you're probably going to get somebody to come back and kill you. Okay? That makes sense to me. That's a rule that you would want to follow and be a blessing to others so you don't kill your neighbors. But wearing clothes with two different materials, is that going to send me, in God's disfavor? I don't know. Who made that one up? I mean, I really don't understand some of this, but they believe it, so.
So I want to say hello to Judy and also Melinda.
Yes, hi. Oh, yes, hi. Sorry to be late. Yeah. I'm glad to be here.
So let me tell you something that's been on my mind a lot, and I want to say it because it's part of the deep struggle I have during this period of time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So I get it. I mean, several people have said, we don't like this transactional analysis idea of God. Like, you do well, God will do well by you. You do evil, and then you could expect evil. All right. So that bounces around in my mind because I'm not sure why, but I've been reading and listening to podcasts a lot in ways I never imagined that I would about what the experience was like for the 300 years of the institution of human slavery that was so much a part of the culture of the United States, and how it became built into the fabric of the very economics of to buy and sell people, and to divide their families, and to sell them, and to treat human beings as just, instruments, worse than mules and horses. And I want to know, okay, well, if God is so transactional, why wasn't the United States smitten? Why wasn't the whole thing just crushed? Because they were doing a lot of it in the name of God. They were carrying it out with the blessing of God. And the enculturization of racism and the idea that one group of people is brighter, better, stronger, smarter, and deserves to treat the others as inferior. And not only inferior, but less than human. The ability to see human beings and see their emotions and all the terror and the suffering that was going on in their lives. And then what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. Still to this day, the United States gets to tell a story which isn't true about its past. It's just not true. So, with all that reading going on and all that learning going on, which I feel, the schools that I went to, the parents that I had, they didn't teach this history. And now you got people that don't want it taught. And then, today on NPR, I'm learning about the incredible struggling of human beings in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince. The terrible breakdown of society which is happening there, where 10 or 12 gangs have basically taken over, what do they say, 60% of the land of Haiti, and they are murdering people indiscriminately. And it's all a power struggle, not even for anything in particular. It's just this rampant, decay of anything human or decent. And I want to say, okay, where are all these ideas about God? If you don't live the way God wants you to live, God will punish you. Well, then why isn't God destroying that? Why isn't that at work? Why isn't that happening? And that's why I come back and I go, well, that's a very primitive way of thinking, because that's not how life unfolds. And I know
with slavery, it did actually come back to kick us in the ass, because we had a terrible war over it where the country almost disintegrated. I think if you do wrong by other people, eventually it'll come around. And I don't think it's God saying, okay, you people are not following my rules, so I'm going to smite you with whatever. It's what happens when you do cruel things to other people. You end up living with hate and cruelty. It's not caused by God. It's us causing it.
So
we're doing it to one another.
So let me ask you. You really believe that? Do you really believe that people who treat other people with hate and cruelty and cause suffering end up with hate and cruelty in their lives?
Yeah. They can't rest easily at night knowing that they've done horrible things to other people. I have the feeling that it doesn't make them a happy person. I can't imagine that it would. And they might not drop dead, or they might not be slaughtered by somebody they've wronged, but I can't believe that they feel good about themselves, really. And I mean, that's an individual basis, but society as a whole, we did pay a price for doing those cruel things to other people. And it wasn't God doing that to us, it was us doing it to ourselves. And I think the people who had slaves, owned slaves, really convinced themselves that they weren't doing anything wrong, because the slaves were not human. To them, slaves were not human. So they're okay. God made certain people to be slaves and certain people to be slave owners. Isn't that what the early, what the church pre-Civil War kind of taught, especially in the slaveholding states? They said, it's okay. So people convinced themselves that it was good, but the institution failed eventually. I think the arc of justice kind of the arc of history kind of bends towards justice. I want to think that. But I don't think God is there pushing it. I think it's us finally coming to our senses about how to treat other people.
But I wonder what makes a person have a moral compass. Is it nurture? Is it nature? And if that person doesn't have, who has this hate, is it possible for that person to change? And how can that person change?
That's a very good question, because there are two pieces to that. I know when I do a mediation, I tell the parties that there are two issues. One is attitude, the other is behavior, and you can't really change attitude, or legislate attitude or command attitude, but you can change behavior. That's much easier to do. so that, even these young Russian soldiers that are being conscripted, they're going to go over, they're going to act the way they've been told to act. But nobody knows, how they're thinking and feeling and what their attitude is, and leaving their homes and their families. So I think your question's an excellent one. I don't know that you can change unless there's some act that that beckons you to change. So I mean, it sounds hopeless in a way. I don't mean it to sound that way, but I mean, look at what's happening in our country today. You can't speak to somebody else about a particular political individual. That's attitude. And so behavior, they'll go and they'll vote, the way they believe. So I don't, I mean, how can you change attitude? How do we do that? I don't know.
Well, so it occurs to me just to simply say it's an easy out, but that the prayers throughout the story of the people of faith has been to ask God to change the hearts of people, to pray that God would change the hearts of people, that God would engage somehow in people, in the hardness of their hearts. But on the other hand, there's another verse, I'm trying to think of the reference, I can't come up with it, but I think it's in the Psalms where the psalmist cries out to God and says, hey, look, when I look around in the world, I see the unjust and the unscrupulous people prosper. The people who are unjust are doing just fine in the world. And I also have to say, God, could I just add a little comment that those of us who are seeking to do right and who are seeking to love are suffering in the world. We seem to be suffering and the unjust seem to be prospering. How is that possible? And, unfortunately, all you hear is the voice of the human prayer in the psalm voicing a brokenness or a complaint to God, but you never hear God's response. I mean, maybe it's just jealousy, but sometimes I feel that way. You want to really get ahead in this world, just get yourself involved in a really unscrupulous, unethical organization and go for it.
Oh, now, come on. Would you feel comfortable doing that? I mean, a lot of this has to do with awareness, too, of what your actions are doing to others. And if you're not aware of it, well, then you're ignorant and, you're going to do horrible things. But I don't think there's anything wrong, though, for asking God to help, with your relationships with other people. Of course there's going to be injustice in this world. It's not a perfect place. I don't know, maybe I'm kind of sounding Job-like, like I'll take what I've been given and, I'll be angry if I see somebody getting away with something horrible, but I still think maybe because I live in a place where I don't have to run for cover every time a bomb comes flying over, or my neighbors aren't coming at me with, clubs or something. I'm lucky, and so I can say, okay, isn't life wonderful? I get up in the morning, there's this beautiful sky, wonderful things to do, I have family, if that were taken away, I don't know how I would feel.
Well, you have that kind of life because you're a good person.
No, not at all. I don't believe that. And I know that the text is trying to say that. I don't think that's true at all. But, I still can find a lot to be thankful for this life that I have. And I'm thankful to God for it. But I'm not tested in the way that a lot of people are. And would they feel the same way? Would they feel happy to be persecuted? I don't know. I probably would not. I haven't experienced that kind of pain. We all have sadness in our lives, but the kind of pain that some people in the world are experiencing. I've been lucky not to have that. So I don't know how I would feel, really. But I certainly don't think it's God saying, you have, done some little thing that I don't find pleasing. So zap, you're going to suffer. I don't think that's it at all. I think we humans make most of our own problems, and a lot of them we can figure out how to undo.
Maybe the
Like,
maybe the voice of the global warming reality, which was never a part of my life when I was a child. We knew nothing about that. We knew that you shouldn't litter because you'll make your town dirty. But this message, this drumbeat of global warming and economic destruction, which is coming, maybe is getting across a similar kind of message, but without necessarily having to say, this is God punishing us for our greedy and consumption way of living. I don't hear a lot of people doing that, but I do hear a lot of scientists and ecologists saying, there is an accountability coming, and it's coming because we have lived without regard for tomorrow. We've lived without regard for our neighbors. And we comfort ourselves by thinking, well, I don't live in the lowlands, so if the sea rises, it's not going to affect me. But we're also now being challenged to say that's really stupid thinking. Because the world,
we're aware. Now we are aware. There's no excuse. It's been presented to us in many different ways, and we can actually see and feel it. It's happening.
Right.
We're in the middle of it. So to be unaware is willful stupidity, or I don't know. I blame it on Fox News, but frankly, it's stupidity. You can see it. Come on, let's do something about it while there's still time. And fine, pray to God, but also, get up and do something for yourself too. You can't just keep saying, well, there's nothing I can do, because there are things we can do. We can do as a whole society, as individuals, but as a whole society too. We're responsible for what we're doing.
And it's not just that the consequences of our behavior will be bad for somebody else. It's the realization. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I was listening to him talk today, and he said, there's an understanding in the scientific world that the molecules of air that you breathe are the molecules of air that the earth is given. And they travel around the world, and people breathe them in and breathe them out. The air you're breathing today might have been breathed by somebody else halfway around the world, and the water that you drink or don't drink today. And his whole point is that as we explore further and further into space, we have an opportunity to see how small, in terms of the neighborhood, the Earth and the population of the Earth really is. Like there's response for every behavior in this world, and that maybe that's part of, I don't know, the language doesn't lend itself well to me because it leads us astray, but maybe that's what, I have this bigger and better sense. I don't call her Mother Earth, but I have this sense of the Earth and of its systems and of the rules of the Earth. They're pretty well set. And if you try to ignore them and you try to, live as if gravity isn't real, or, you're not going to do well. You're not. You might, but the people who come after you are not. So maybe that's what this language about God is really about. I don't know. Maybe that's too liberal. Maybe that's too, I don't know. I'm frustrated with my own ability to then say, how is it that God does deal with us? And last week, we talked about, the images that are very acceptable to me is that God is walking with us, hearing the decisions we're making, guiding us, beckoning us, encouraging us to move in more positive directions, all of us, individually and collectively, nations and individuals. God is beckoning us. What was that phrase you quoted, Debbie, that history, the arc of history bends toward justice?
Bends toward justice.
Right.
Well,
And I
I
think
think it does.
in this
Yeah.
model, it's that God, it's not just an arc that is out there existing, but that God is actually enticing the human history to move in the direction of justice and of love, and to open our eyes to see what we are doing, which is not only destroying our neighbors, but destroying ourselves, and enticing us, rewarding us, if you will, for any observation that we see where we can move together in love. But, I mean, I can only say that like once or twice a month, because the rest of the month I'm depressed about the experience of what's really happening in this world, and how hard it is, and how hard the hearts of human beings really are. It's startling to me, and maybe I'm missing the point that my own heart is hard in that way too. I don't know.
I mean, we lived through the 20th century, which has to have been the most horrific century for humanity. More people were killed wantonly by other people who thought they were the chosen people. And what have we learned from it? Again, it seems like we're arcing towards justice, but then we get hung up and we get pushed back, and it just keeps, we're never going to get there completely. I'm convinced of that. This world is imperfect. We're just not going to do it. But after all of that, in the last century, how can people stand in front of you and say, Hitler was good?
Yeah.
Hitler had good
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
People are saying that now on the television. People who have celebrity and notoriety, and people are listening to them. Shame on them. We're aware of what happened. We know the cause and effect of that kind of attitude. And so do that at your own peril. We need to speak up against people who are fomenting hatred. We just need to. I think as people of God, if we're going to say we're people of God, we're called to do that. We're called to stick our neck out and say, you don't speak for me. I object to what you're saying. You have the right to say it, but I have the right to call you out on it and try and convince others that you're wrong. There's just a certain point where you have to do something. And even if it's just using your tongue, then do it. Don't sit back and just let things happen, because then you're just as guilty. Is that depressing or what?
I don't know. Is that depressing?
I mean, in Islam, there's a saying that says, if you see injustice, if you see a wrong, it's your duty to try and correct it. And if you cannot correct it with your hands by doing some action, then correct it with your heart. But say something. At least that's the very least you can do, is to say something. So when we hear some of these outrageous things that people are saying, why are we all sitting back? I don't think that's the majority of Americans' opinions. What is wrong with us? I don't know.
Well, I think some of it is fear, and some of it is a desire to conform. I mean, the people who are not saying anything now about some of the most outrageous things that have been said, and your point is a good one. Why are they doing that? What is motivating people from not stepping up to the plate? What is it? And how do you get people to listen to another point of view when their agenda is fixed?
for many years, there's been, not in my world necessarily, but many years, this great tradition of Holocaust deniers. This is, to me, it was the earliest version of fake news, but, I went to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., and, when they were building the Holocaust Memorial, of course, all the rhetoric that was going on in the undercurrent was that this is a monument to something that never happened. This was all made up. This didn't happen. It's not happening. We don't need to be worried about it. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get the guy that said that, the children that were killed in New England in that massacre, that they were all actors and they were all, they staged it all. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. And I want to say, in line of this tradition in the book, in the Bible, says that the answer to all of this is to go back to the law of God, to go to the law of God. And you're going to see that as we get through Nehemiah, one of the traditions that still affects Christians, and it's still a part of our tradition, was that in the period of Ezra and Nehemiah, they decided that one of the things that needed to be done regularly in the lives of human beings, weekly even, was that the law of God needed to be read. And that the law needed to be read, and that it then needed to be interpreted. So we're right in the middle of the period of time in the reconstruction of Jerusalem, where they began to read the Torah every week. And after it was read, it was interpreted, which is what in Christian tradition we would say was when we read Scripture and then we preach on it. And that became, in this period of time, that was in their mind God's solution to the wandering ways of human beings, to have the law of God read so that we did not forget it and that we would continue to try to live by it. And of course, in both the Jewish and in the Christian tradition, the law being read would lead you then to a period of seeking forgiveness, because you would be aware that you had wandered away from it. And that cycle, that pattern for what we do when we come to, quote, Christian worship, is right here in the year 400 BCE, is beginning to fall into a pattern. But as I read Nehemiah, and I hear Nehemiah talk about the law of God, we got to rediscover the law of God, I cry out for the words of Jesus, who said, the law of God is actually quite simple. It's love your neighbor as yourself, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. But I don't hear them saying this back here in Nehemiah's time. I don't hear them saying what the law is. They just say the law. And then they go back and they recite some of those 600 laws, quote unquote, that developed as they expanded the law beyond the 10 Commandments to the Torah and all the rest of the things that you're supposed to do and not do, like make a fabric out of two different kinds of material next to each other.
They're picking things that are appealing to maybe some people in the community, and they'll focus on that. Maybe something that's easier to fix or easier for you to apply because it doesn't cost that much for you to do. Like in Ezra, when they said, cast out your wives and children that are foreign. Well, maybe Ezra had something against foreign women. We don't know.
Yeah, or at the very least, it appears he wasn't married to a foreigner, because there was no big suffering for him.
So pick on something that's easier to do. Whereas if you pick on don't kill your neighbors, well, maybe there's sometimes we really want to kill our neighbors. Maybe we want to get rich and claim their land or this or that or the other thing. So we'll still say it's okay. God says go kill those people because they're not us. And then fixate on something like, get rid of your foreign wives. So it depends on who's interpreting saying.
Yeah, and it's, again, I go back to the issue of human slavery. I mean, one of the reasons that people were so blind to the fact that the people they had enslaved were human beings was because their eyes were filled with greed. They saw an incredibly profitable way to raise and harvest cotton and other various crops because they had free labor. It was the free labor that blinded them to the crying, the weeping of children, the suffering that was going on in the lives of people that they had taken over their lives. They didn't see it because all they saw was greed. All they saw was money and power.
Right. I mean, certainly God wouldn't want me to be poorer. Would God want me to be poorer?
No.
Just for the sake of these people that I can't relate to?
Yeah, absolutely. God, no.
Duh.
No.
You're looking at human beings and you're not seeing them. You're just not. You're seeing, I want to stay rich and this is a good way to do it. Well, that's sin. To me, that's sin. But I don't know.
But how do you deal with the deniers? And we see them today, particularly the fringe is now in the mainstream.
Yeah.
You know, what do you, I just don't know, you know, how do you push them back to the margins again? You know, denying truth, justice. And when you talk about, you know, justice, if you're going to deny it, then where do you go next? It's going back to what you have said many times, Pastor Lou, and that, you know, man is broken. But how do you fix them? How do you put them together? I mean, there's so much now that, you know, replicates what we're reading about, and how do you go forward? And what do you do with people who are denying the truth about so much of what's happening today?
Have you seen, they're popping up more regularly now, these, I don't know who's putting them on television, but these ads about Jesus Gets Us. Have you seen that? You watch enough television to see that there's a whole ad campaign called Jesus Gets Us? One of the campaigns, if you watch for them, yeah, you'll see them. Somebody's spending a lot of money, and they're pretty high-tech commercials. Jesus Gets Us. It doesn't tag you to anything in the end, but one of them that they're doing is they're showing segments of families that are arguing. They're fighting. They're fighting at the Thanksgiving table. They're fighting at the Christmas table. And the commentator comes on in script and in voice and says, Jesus had family too. and Jesus argued with family. But, here's the tag, they say, Jesus argued with his family, but he never disowned them. And I feel like, wait a minute, what's the angle you're going at here? Because, you know, quite frankly, in all honesty, some of the environment I live in today, there are some people who, you know, I used to be able to talk with and walk with like family that I can't be with anymore. I can't. They've made it so that if we're together, there's nothing we can talk about because we can't talk civilly. And that seems to have all broken down, at least in my world. And so then what am I supposed to do? I'm faced with people who, I don't know, they've accepted as fact things that I think are outrageous, you know, that are just beyond the pale.
That's what Judy was saying. How do we try to get along when we can't even talk to certain segments of society?
Right. Like, how are we supposed to conduct that? There's a movement going on in the clergy here in our area. I guess the second week of January is the week of Christian unity. And although it's come and gone years before, and I've never done anything about it, but the Clergy Association is talking about trying to have something, I don't know, a coffee clutch, a round table conversation where we might, as clergy, get together and try to demonstrate that there is still Christian unity, that there is unity among Christians. And I want to say, well, I think you could probably pull that off here in this area, but I'm not even really sure about that. And I think you're better off to have clergy together, but I don't know if I would like to have a big meeting and advertise it as a meeting for Christians from all different walks of life to then sit down and talk about what we all agree on today. I don't know. I mean, we're living in a time that's not really filled with Christian unity. It's not.
And so what do we do, when we see that language is not effective? Just as you suggest, we walk away from it. We walk away from it.
Move to Australia.
But I mean, and we lose them in a circle of, friends. Because there's no commonality anymore. And that, I don't know what the other option is. I mean, agreement, or flight, or I don't know. So it goes back to, how do we make the change?
Yeah.
Is it possible? Because the change really starts right, very, very early on. And, you have to influence or convince those people who are bringing up little people, to think in a certain way. How do you do that?
You're asking the right questions, but I don't have the answers. I don't know. I mean, I see the effect of it, the divisions that are happening. I don't know. It used to be that we had trouble discovering our unity among denominations of Christians, but I think that in some ways what divides us now is not denominational differences.
Right.
It's not.
Political differences.
Yeah, it's political differences, and people who can agree on, the meaning of the Last Supper or the communion, and might even agree about baptism, that doesn't mean they can sit down and talk together today. I think they cannot.
Yeah.
Well, listen, why don't we read the next chapter and see this ancient time, if there's ideas or clues for us in what happens here in Nehemiah's time. We're at Nehemiah chapter 2.
Again, me?
Yes, please.
Okay. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was served him, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now, I had never been sad in his presence before, so the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you were not sick? This can only be sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. And then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it." The king said to me, and the queen was also sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a date. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may grant me passage until I arrive in Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, directing him to give me timber to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the gracious hand of my God was upon me. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent officers of the army and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the Israelites. So I came to Jerusalem and was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night and I and a few men with me, I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the animal I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate past the Dragon's Spring and to the Dung Gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the Fountain Gate and to the King's Pool, but there was no place for the animal I was riding to continue. So I went up by way of the valley by night and inspected the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned? Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace." I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, "Let us start building." So they committed themselves to the common good. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they mocked and ridiculed us, saying, "What is this that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" Then I replied to them, "The God of heaven is the one who will give us success, and we, his servants, are going to start building. But you have no share or claim or memorial in Jerusalem."
Okay,
Oh,
get them out of there again.
yeah.
Us and them.
Right away, immediately, right away. Some of this is an echo again of Nehemiah, who comes with the writ of Cyrus. Artaxerxes is the successor to Cyrus. He comes representing the Persia, Persian Empire is still in power, and it's over in the east on the other side of the river. So the journey of Nehemiah is from east to west, and he's remembering his heritage of being among the people of God who lived in Judah and who knew the city of Jerusalem. But the rebuilding that took place during the time of Ezra has evidently been torn down again. So this is the third attempt. This is the third mission to rebuild Jerusalem. And, we danced around a little bit that one of the things that happened was there was great resistance on the part of people who lived and had survived around Jerusalem to the rebuilding of Ezra. And part of that was because Ezra enforced these purity laws, and it ruled out the Samaritans. And so the Samaritans got empowered, and they came and they tore down the building that was being built. They weren't going to accept this decision that Ezra had landed on them, that they weren't good enough to be a part of this city of Jerusalem. They weren't. So they destroyed it again. This is the third time actually that it's been destroyed. The first time by the Babylonians, and then 2 times by the survivors or the remnants themselves. People in the neighborhood around Jerusalem saw the building and came and tore it down. And they burnt it. They didn't want the city of Jerusalem rebuilt because it had been only a source of, terror for the people who had lived in the land. It wasn't a symbol of good grace or of neighborly ways, or of people who loved their neighbors. And, it wasn't like that at all. So here this Nehemiah now comes. He's had a vision. He's asked Artaxerxes to finance his vision, and he's gotten supplies and money again. But as Barbara said, sure enough, he runs right smack up against people who are ready to fight him, people that are going to resist what he wants to try to do. Why don't we read on a little bit, because it's like story-like in terms of, what happens next.
All right. Let me find the next chapter. Okay. Excuse me, wait. Oh no, now I've got this new international version again.
Are you reading from the computer?
Yeah. Let me see if I can get the,
Somebody else want to read?
yeah, somebody else read now. I'm a little tired.
Where are we? Chapter 3?
Chapter 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll read, but again, remember my Bible is it's a very old one. Okay. Then Elishbib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they builded the sheep gate. They sanitized it and set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of Meah. They sanitized it unto the tower of Hananiel. And next unto him builded the men of Jericho, and next to them builded Zachar, the son of Imri. But the fish gate did the sons of Hasaniah build, who also laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. And next unto them repaired Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Koz. And next unto them repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Mishiabil. And next unto them repaired Zadok, the son of Baanah. And next unto them the Tegohites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute and just say, now I know why Debbie didn't want to read.
As I was struggling with all those names, I thought, why did I volunteer?
I know, and if you look ahead, you're going to see it's the same deal. It just goes on and on and on. And the point of the whole chapter is that now, if you were to look at the city walls, the fathers of families, lineages, have all taken a section of the wall, and they're all working on their own section of the wall. All these individual families have moved up, and it's not just the men, but you'll see, if you look at the end of chapter, verse 11 or 12, the guy there, Shallum, the son of Halocheth, ruler of half of the district, made repairs, he and his daughters. So it's these families have now they've thrown the towel in, and they are working now day and night as families to rebuild the entire city. And so one of the commentators says that this is the first time that you begin to get the sense that if the city of Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt, it's not going to be rebuilt because of one person. It's not a David or a Nehemiah, but that what's actually happening here, and I'll see if I can say this in a way because I think it's very exciting, that the city of Jerusalem is not walls. The city of Jerusalem is not an individual. The city of Jerusalem, as it is rising up out of the ashes, is actually the result of the coming together and the decision of a community of people. For the first time in its history, this is like what we would call a grassroots movement. And it is being built out of the vision of, as the city is being rebuilt, a community is being built. And it's radical in its idea in the Bible. Because this is no longer a city of kings or queens or of money or of, whatever. This is a city of the determination of people. And I know you've seen or heard stories about how this happens, right? You get whole areas of cities that are abandoned and the government doesn't care anymore, and then all of a sudden community organizers come in and they light a spark, and the spark catches and people care. And everyone works. They clean up their yard, and the cities and the streets are picked up. And all of a sudden the city no longer is just stones and pavement, but it's a shining example of people people working together and creating an environment in which they want to live. And they were not, the people doing this, they were not priests. They were not, this wasn't the priestly order, fixing things. This wasn't the political order. This is just men and women given to a passion to repair the city and to rebuild the city in which they were going to seek refuge. And I think better to have just said that than to have stumbled over. I mean, it goes on. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
He's going to call for help. Right.
And so then maybe even just because we have time, we could skip. We might not even read the whole of the next chapter, but just to read the response of what happens to people who are used to things going the way they normally go. Some overly zealous leader or a king or somebody who believes they're anointed by God to do something as an individual. If we start in chapter 4, you're going to see that the rumors and the word about this city being built by the decisions and the passions of people is catching a reputation in the minds and the hearts of people. So maybe, Judy, you want to pick up from chapter 4?
Sure. Unless, Debbie, you want to go on? Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samarla and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity, and cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work.
Okay, now I want to stop you there, and you realize the power of verse 6. So you have the naysayers, you have Sanballat and his buddies, and they are saying, they're laughing, they're mocking this community, and they're saying these people, they don't know anything about building. There's no way the city of refuge they're trying to build will help them. A fox could bump up against the wall and it would fall down. And they go on, and then they mock, pray to God to say, please, this is such an embarrassment. Could you please stop them from doing what they're doing, because they don't know what they're doing. And then verse 6, you see what verse 6 says, so we rebuilt the wall. We did it. And all the wall was joined together to half its heights, for the people had a mind to work. I mean, there it is. It sits all by itself right in the middle of this complicated book of Nehemiah. And I mean, it could be it could be a motto for a building campaign for a church, When the people had a mind to build it, when the people had a mind to not wait for God or somebody else or some leader who was inspired, or they had a mind to not wait for somebody else to do it, but they then put their own families on the wall and their own commitments to it. Yes, there were naysayers that came around them, but in the end, this is something new rising up among the people of God. This is the will of the people. And you've heard nothing of this kind of idea up until this particular point. The people who are always following what the leader says or doing or disobeying what the leader says. Here, the people had a mind to rebuild a city of refuge, and they put their whole families to work on it. All right, I'm going to let you go ahead, Judy, and read the rest of it.
But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversary said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them, and slay them, and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore said I, in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. And it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass from that time forth, that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, the shields, and the bows, and the hybridons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens, with those that laden, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. And I said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us, our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every one put them off for washing.
So, do you get what's happening? I know you do. So this community spirit has so infected this community that they have managed now. One commentary that I read said that the people who came back to Jerusalem were not city dwellers by and large. They were not looking to live inside the city. But if you've seen anything about how these cities worked, they were places of refuge that you could run to. So you would live out in the plains and you would live out in the areas around the city, but out there you were pretty indefensible. So you could go out, they were agrarian, they raised crops, they had animals, and you couldn't do that inside the city. So they would go out of the city to work during the day, and they would keep their animals. And generally, as long as there was no invasion, they would sleep there and build their houses there. But what Nehemiah is saying is they saw a great genius in the fact that the workers on the city would work, and they would have their weapons at their side. They were always ready to be invaded. And then at night, the farmers who lived out in the regions would come into the city, and they would take over the watch at night so the workers could sleep. And so you have this massive picture of cooperation. It's just incredible cooperation. And there's a few slights in here to the noblemen and to the aristocracy. And, again, the footnotes will tell you that basically Nehemiah was saying, look, everyone's got to pull their weight here. Nobody gets to sit back and say, well, I'm a nobleman or I'm a noblewoman and I can't get my hands dirty. There is this grassroots of both the city dwellers and the country dwellers, of both the military and the construction people, and everybody seems to have figured out how to cooperate together, and they have this common signal that if the trumpet blows, whether from the fields or whether from the city, everyone will come together and they will work together for the protection of their own way of life. I know it's not in the text, but I'm just going to say I think there is a hearkening back to the days of the early conquest of the land. After they had crossed the river back into the promised land, these are the kinds of cooperative efforts that allowed the people to go about living their lives. They were a peaceable kingdom. They had managed to figure out cooperative systems that allowed them to go about planting the crops in very rich and fertile soil, and to go about the work of being a blessing to the families of the earth. Remember that great mission way back when? And they had managed to find a way to do that. And yes, they had to defend themselves against marauding people who hated them, but they only ever organized their military for that particular invasion. As soon as those invasions were over, everybody went back to work. The farmers went back to the farms, the builders went back to the builders, and their system of protection among them. And that, back in the early days, the community of Moses, when they arrived, that was how God had sought to defend them. The tribes were defended not by huge military structures or kings or queens or anything, but simply by militia. Just the strength of the community was a sign of the presence of God. I'm just going to wait and see what anybody says. Is right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somehow, I guess what I see is a great change from this idea of, throwing their hands up and waiting for God to do something. And saying, you know what, if I just confess my sins, then God will fix all this. But what I see rising up, at least what Nehemiah is talking about, is in his own, he's more political, he's not a religious leader, but he's seeing a revolution. He's seeing a surge of the idea of the power of the individual when they work together.
It's kind of the beginning of a sense of community.
Yes.
Where there was before. Yeah.
One commentator says that when you read Ezra and Nehemiah, you see the rebuilding of the priesthood, which happens a lot with Ezra. They find all the legitimate priests. And then you see the rebuilding of the walls, the start of the rebuilding of the temple. And then they build the city, the walls around the city. So you have the rebuilding of the priesthood, you have the rebuilding of the temple and the walls, and this part of Nehemiah, you see the building of a community. This is the rise of a community and its power for affecting change in the world. If I were a community organizer, this is the part of the Bible I would preach. This is it. Comments, questions, thoughts, reflections?
Well, it seems people like to work together when there's a project they can believe in. What happens when that's done?
Good point. Yeah, find another project.
Yeah, find another project. Move on to something else.
Well, I guess it has to be where everybody has some vested interest. Yeah, it could be different, but still, the goal is common to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, they all had a stake in it. They all somehow felt the stake that was theirs. And, in the opposition, there's always opposition. Somehow opposition makes the movement stronger. People redouble their efforts. They feel, that, if we don't do this, it's not going to happen. I just like that theology a whole lot better than the theology of why, God, are you letting this happen to us?
Yeah.
The passiveness. There's a great activism in this, a sense that God is going to give us the equipment we need, but we have to provide the rest of it. We have to be smart. We have to engage in what we want to do. Do you want to build this city? Do you want a place of refuge where you can go to? And your whole family is going to have to participate in this. You can't wait for God to do it. All right, we have arrived at the end. So if you have any thoughts you want to share before you go?
Well, it's a better end than it was a beginning.
Yes, it is. It
I'm
is.
still waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, it's more, unfortunately, you're right. Just wait to see what's going to happen now.
A little hiatus then.
Yes.
Right.
Right, we should relax and breathe a little in between.
Yeah, because right now there's good days coming for Jerusalem and for the people and for the city, but boy, there are some bad days coming as well.
Yeah. Like today.
Yeah.
In Ukraine. Yeah.
All right, my friends. It's always
Thank
good to
you.
see you. Melinda, it's good to see you.
Good to be back. Good to be back.
I worry about you and your husband all the time and those bears that you have surrounding your house. and he takes very relaxed pictures of them, but I always am wondering, so where are you when this picture's being taken? And this
Indoors.
Yeah, and this mama bear has claimed your porch and all the wonders
Indoors.
of Yeah.
Always indoors.
Okay, good.
And Melinda has named them.
Oh, have you?
Oh, really?
What have you named them? What are their names?
I named one bear. His name is Otis.
Is that the big one?
Like the
It's a
other.
baby.
Oh, it's a baby. Okay. Well,
Last year. Wait until this year.
yeah. I know.
Well,
All right.
the good news is that we called off the bear hunt, so the bears lived.
Right.
Yay.
Right. Yeah, I wonder.
Thank you for the lesson. I will get caught up in between next week and
Okay.
look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday.
Okay, great. I look forward to seeing you all too. Goodbye, everybody.
Have
Good
a
night.
good night, everybody.
Good night.
Okay.